Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay. Pursuant to recently adopted amendments to the Illinois Open Meetings Act included in Public Act 1010640, public bodies may, in certain circumstances, hold entirely virtual public meetings without a quorum physically present in any one location. Governor Pritzker's Executive Order 2021-30 has extended this provision through December 11th, 2021. As chair of the Finance Committee, I have made the determination that it is not practical nor prudent to meet in person at this time. Accordingly, this meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted virtually with members of the committee, village board, and staff participating through the Zoom webinar platform. Village Manager Phil Crowley is in the Village Hall conference room in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. Phil, can I have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Trustee Vree.
Here.
Trustee Hallwax.
Here.
Trustee Rubin.
Here.
We have a quorum, and I'll just make note for the record that we have the village president in attendance, as well as several members of the village board, including Trustee Listener, Trustee Onderdonk, and I believe Trustee Mulvaney is going to be joining as well.
Trustee Rubin.
And well, yeah, Trustee Rubin is here as part of the committee.
Okay.
As noted, today's Finance Committee meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting via Zoom webinar software. It's being audio recorded and simulcast on the village's Facebook page. A quorum of members is present via remote access. As required by law, I will ask for a roll call rather than voice votes on any agenda item requiring a vote. In accordance with the supplemental rule the board approved on April 16th, 2020, here's how public comment will be taken at this meeting. The email address and telephone number designated for public comment for this meeting were published with the meeting agenda. This time, I would ask that Jordan Lester read the public comments received on non-agenda items that were submitted prior to the meeting. Public comments on any agenda items, if any, will be read when we reach that item on the agenda. Jordan, are there any public comments?
Trustee Vree, we did not receive any this evening.
If a member of the public would like to submit a public comment during the meeting, please email your comment to glencoe@villageofglencoe.org. Comments submitted during the meeting may be read at the end of the meeting. Written comments should be limited to 400 words. Okay, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
Second. Can I second it?
You
I can second it.
Okay.
All right. We have a motion and a second.
Have a roll call, Phil?
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
Trustee Hallwax.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Okay, so we have probably a longer meeting tonight to talk about the budget, but for our first two topics, we'll go through the normal Finance Committee reports. So Nikki, if you can walk us through.
Nikki, we can see your screen and you're muted.
I got it. Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. Okay, we're off to a rough start. Okay, so for tonight's agenda, we'll be going through the October Treasurer's Report. I won't spend a lot of time on this. As Chair Vree mentioned, we do have a big agenda this evening, and we will slightly touch on the Community Investment Program monthly updates, and then finish up with the main event of the calendar year 2022 draft budget. So for the month of October, we're continuing to see good news story in terms of revenue. All of our revenues are performing fairly strong. We did start to really see property taxes flow in through October with the delayed deadline at the beginning of the month. We do think that we might still miss this budget target by maybe 2%, just because of uncollectible taxes, but it's still a little early to tell that. We should know a little bit more once we see November's receipts. And that's more than offset by the performance of the other revenues that are mostly above budget in the general fund. In the water fund, this continues our good news story here. We're predicting that we will end the year over budget in revenue, about $1.2 million. The big drivers there are volumetric revenue, primarily driven by drought-like conditions over the summer, and then also the one-time receipt of American Rescue Plan Act funds, and that's about $600,000. And from a cash flow projection perspective, our sales taxes continue to perform strong with the new legislation. We are seeing the use tax continue to dip, albeit it's a very small amount. And when we combine these two revenues together to eliminate the effects of those legislative changes, we're still projecting to end the year about $730,000 over budget, which is significant in this category.
And I assume the 247,000 for October sales tax is a record.
Yes, easily. I think that is extremely high. So hopefully we'll see that continue through the holiday season.
Yep.
And then lastly, just the projected impact for the year. With all of these elements combined above and under budget, we're projecting that revenues will end the year about $865,000 over budget, which will minimize any amount that we would otherwise be dipping into the general fund for capital expenses. And actually with this month's report, we may see as much as a $400,000 surplus in the general fund this year. So we'll continue to report out on that and monitor that as the year goes on. Any questions on October report? Okay, seeing none, I will turn it over to Stella for the golf club report.
Thank you. October was a good month and a bad month. The beginning of the month was excellent. The end of the month was very wet and rainy. We did exceed last year's total rounds. Revenues exceeded our budget by 81%. We did have 3 significant events in October. Our Ladies League had a closing shotgun. TaylorMade had a par 3 shootout for all their PGA staff professionals. And we also had our senior fall classic. Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club is going along very well. We had $15,000 in donations made. The current balance in that fund is $167,000. We do have a meeting planned for tomorrow evening, and we're moving forward with a GoFundMe page and a series of emails culminating with the Giving Tuesday on November 30th. And that's my report.
Thank you, Stella. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Linda can provide us with our monthly CIP update.
Good evening, everyone. The only items to note are a few changes to the delivery dates on some items. One item actually came in earlier, the sidewalk tractor, and the other 2 trucks are just delayed a month. And also a delay on the storm sewer drainage improvements, which is pushed to next year.
Okay. Any other questions on monthly CIP updates? Okay, moving on. All right, so if we're ready to start the main event, so everyone should have received your draft budget delivered to your homes. I will try and reference page numbers where I can. It is tabbed and we will be going through the budget in order of the budget printout that you have. For anyone at home that wants to follow along, there is a full PDF linked in the agenda item, and the page number should follow accordingly as well. So for this evening, we'll start with a little overview of the budget. We'll be going through the department budgets one by one, along with the fund budgets towards the back end of the budget, and also be reviewing the community investment plan and financing plan. New this year, we'll be integrating a lot of the capital items into the department budgets to try and kind of eliminate some of the duplication. And at this point, I will turn it over to Manager Corrali to kick things off for us.
Thanks, Nikki. And I won't spend a lot of time. I just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of the work that went into this budget document and some of the major factors that drive and have driven the development of the budget. The board has been involved in various components for the last several months, in particular the Finance Committee, in terms of looking at many of our projections, walking through the financial policies that guide the village's budget development process. And tonight is the opportunity to dive into the document that Nikki just described a few moments ago. I've said this every year that I've been the village manager. I firmly believe that the budget document remains the most important policy document that the village board reviews and discusses and ultimately approves every year, mainly because it outlines what's most important to the board and to the staff in exercising our responsibilities to our constituents, to our community. The story of this year's budget really is, I think, that of cautious recovery and a significant investment in our infrastructure. The good news about both of those points is that when we were developing our budget a year ago, we were in a very different environment. The outlook was much more bleak. It was very difficult to predict where our local economy was going to go, let alone where the national economy was going to go. We are starting to see pieces of recovery, but we've really seen a blossoming recovery this year. And with that has come a much more vibrant, much more exciting downtown environment that continues to not only be an area that people enjoy to visit, but also a significant revenue generator for our community. And I think that it tied with numerous other components and factors really do paint a brighter picture and one of a time of recovery. But I do say cautious recovery because we want to be very conscious of some of the outstanding issues that will no doubt impact the village's operations. One of those relates to inflation, an environment that we really haven't had to operate within in several decades. We are seeing significant inflation, and that does have an impact on our operational costs. We have taken that into account based off of feedback from the Finance Committee over the last few months to make sure that the projections that we have in place in the budget from the standpoint of particularly capital investments are appropriate as best as we can estimate at this point. The budget itself is big, and it's big because we are tapping into significant revenues that have been stored away for investment at the appropriate time. We also had a successful referendum passed this past April, which has injected resources into the village's budget to accommodate the capital investments that were anticipated. We also saw and continue to see grant funding directed toward the village from a variety of avenues. Here on the screen, you see we are benefiting from about $1.2 million in American Recovery Plan Act resources, which are going into our water fund investments. Rebuild Illinois funds, which over the last 3 years we have aggregated from the state of Illinois, and those will go into our street resurfacing projects this year. CMAP provided us a grant that's going to pay for about 80% of our Hazel Avenue crossing improvements for the Green Bay Trail. Safe Routes to School, we're finally going to be able to invest those resources from the state of Illinois in several improvements around our downtown around the community related to the active transportation plan. And last year we received a one-time donation that is offsetting the cost of 2 of our public safety squad vehicles. So that tied with a strong revenue picture is providing us with the resources to do the types of investments that are listed and we'll talk through tonight. We do have a few operational changes that are outlined in the budget document, mostly related to the addition of a few staff members, one management analyst in the public safety department, and a reinstatement of a communications manager position in the village manager's office. In addition, we are continuing to focus our efforts on operational improvements. We should be in our last year of our ERP implementation. We had a bit of a slowdown thanks to the pandemic, but I'm excited to say that that project is continuing along, and we will continue to see benefits of a more unified and integrated ERP in our day-to-day operations. So we are continuing to focus on best practice and the ability to make sure that our operations are efficient and effective in the day-to-day work that we do on behalf of our community. And this year, we're also taking some active steps to green our operations. And we'll talk through this a bit as we go through departmental budgets. But this relates to some of our rolling stock. For the first time, we are anticipating the opportunity to integrate electric vehicles into our fleet, our municipal fleet. And this is a first step that we're taking, I believe, to transition transition our rolling stock more toward what we anticipate is going to be the norm over the coming decade. We are also going to be working to integrate electric car charging stations in our downtown. I'm excited that hopefully before the end of this fiscal year, we will see 2 of those stations in place. And we're going to continue our efforts to find ways to improve the way the village operates as an organization, but also to provide those opportunities to our community wherever possible. So lots of good work, I think, integrated into the budget document, which you will see as we walk through it. One point I will make is that this week, the president, as you likely saw on the news, signed into law the infrastructure bill, bipartisan infrastructure bill that worked its way through Congress. We are hopeful that some of those resources are going to make their way to the village of Glencoe, and we're going to do everything we can as we talk about our long-range CIP, a $54 million investment plan over the next 10 years, to find resources as we have this year to really offset the cost of those and to limit the out-of-pocket expense for our residents on improving our infrastructure overall as a whole. So I just wanted to, again, provide a bit of an overview. As Nikki said, we're going to walk through the entire budget document. That may sound daunting, but I guarantee we'll do it in an efficient manner. And I'll get out of the way and let us get started with that. So Nikki, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Manager Corrali. Okay, so working through the budget document on pages 33 to 51 is the financial forecast. This is a 5-year forecast that runs from calendar year 2022 to calendar year 2026. We did review this in detail at the last Finance Committee meeting, so I'll just hit over the highlights here. The forecast focuses on the 3 main operating funds of the village with the most activity, which are typically the general fund, the water fund, and the motor fuel tax fund. The main factors affecting the forecast this year are a lot of the factors that are affecting the budget as a whole, and you'll see these themes run through the budget request this evening. First and foremost is the prioritization of infrastructure improvements. The story of this budget is capital. That is by far the lion's share of what we're requesting this evening. Also adjusting for state budget impacts and what changes might come of that as the state continues or starts their new budget process. Logistical challenges, as Manager Corrali mentioned, as we start to acquire some of the equipment and vehicle replacements that are scheduled, we are seeing longer delivery times. We've already seen that with a few of our vehicles, as long as 22 months in some cases. So that will be a challenge as we move forward. Rising supply and commodities costs, you'll see that throughout the budget. Our departments looked at the supplies and commodities that they would normally buy on an annual basis, and we did adjust those upwards in anticipation of seeing some inflation. Also, debt financing infrastructure needs, how we would pay for all of these funds. We'll get into it in a moment, but fortunately, all of the capital requests that are included in this year's budget have funds that are already set aside. We've already been planning for these expenses, and we are continuing to plan for the future, the rest of that $54 million that will be coming over the next 10 years. Also designing fee structures around costs, making sure that we are covering the cost of our programs, the cost of our infrastructure improvements. We'll talk in a moment about our water revenues, our recommended fee adjustments there. as well as our garbage collection services fees and sewer fees. The good news story with the financial forecast, if I can just sum it up quickly, is that in the next 5 years, we are projecting strong reserves in the general fund, and that was not always the case. So you will see on the next slide that we have a financial policy adjustment as a result of that. So that is actually a good news story, despite the fact that we have $54 million of capital needs that we need to fund, significant needs that will come out of the general fund. We will still be able to maintain our general fund reserve, which is good. Moving into the next section of the document on pages 52 to 63 are the village's key financial policies. We did go through this earlier this year at the Finance Committee, and we made some changes, most significantly to our pension funding policy that was discussed at length. Referencing back to the financial forecast, because of the way that our forecast does look over the next 5 years, now would be the opportune time to make an adjustment in the general fund reserve policy. One of the things that we've talked about at the Finance Committee is adjusting that upwards as much as 25%. What we're recommending is to allow our fund balance policy to grow with our revenues over time and phase that in over year over year. Our current policy was sitting at 15%. So we're recommending 16% this year and phasing in annual 1% increases. Obviously that can be adjusted at any time, but that's what we're recommending as of today. From a property tax levy perspective, we do have an allowable increase of 1.4% this year. Pursuant to the village's policy and our past practice, that is what we are recommending. We will be having the property tax levy hearing Thursday night at the village board meeting. So all that are interested are welcome to join us for that as well. And also just important to note that we are recommending the abatement of the alternate revenue bond payment. That would be debt service that instead of levying a property tax for that, we will be paying that out of water fund revenue. So that will decrease the property tax levy. That's good news. And then lastly, on a pension funding notice, as I mentioned earlier, we have completely overhauled this policy. We've changed our funding methodology. Instead of a fixed point in the future, we've opened up our amortization period to help us pay down our unfunded liability quicker, which should stabilize the village's contribution. The good news story here is that for the first time in several years, our recommended police pension contribution is flat. Our actuarial study that was completed as of December 31st last year was very favorable. It was actually recommending a required contribution $60,000 less than what we are contributing this year. And the Finance Committee recommended that we maintain that contribution as flat. So what we are hoping to see in the next few years is that trend will continue, that we will start to see that contribution stabilize and we'll start to bring that unfunded liability down.
Nikki, if I can real quick, just for the benefit of the board, we, as you likely know, are members of the Northwest Municipal Conference, which is a council of government that includes several dozen Northwest Illinois communities. One of the conversations we've been having at the Legislative Committee has been around pension funding and pension funding models. I'm pleased to say that tomorrow at a meeting, Finance Director Nikki Larson, along with her counterpart from the Village of Glenview, are going to be educating a number of other communities on the funding policy that we have put in place here in Glencoe. It is not a typical process that other communities have taken on, and it's something that is saving our community over the next several decades millions of dollars, and being able to tell that good story to other communities and model good fiscal policy is really a great testament to the leadership of the village board and of Nikki in working through this policy change. So I just wanted to make that mention for the benefit of the group. Nikki reminded me that presentation is tomorrow, and she's going to be talking to a whole bunch of folks about it. So Nikki, I'll get out of the way. Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. I'll record the cliff notes for anyone that's interested. Okay. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to turn this over to our Assistant Finance Director, Linda Miller, and she's going to review the fee and fine schedule changes.
Thank you. The fee and fine schedule can be found on page 64, starting in your budget document, if you'd like to reference that. Our fee and fine schedule analysis begins late in the summer when we do a survey to neighboring communities. The results of that are distributed then to our departments, and they review if there's any additional fees that we would like to include as recommendations. This year, staff elected not to include any new fees. There are just a few fees that we have increases in, one being the water rates at 6.5%. That is a little bit less than the water rate study, and that's due to the additional revenues we're seeing in the water fund, along with the delay in the distribution system with the addition of the Skokie Lagoon upgrade to the water main there. The sanitary sewer rates are recommended to go up 3%, and that is to help us fund the infrastructure that is outlined in the CIP plan over the next 10 years. The general collection service fee, the garbage fee, is going up, recommended at 1.4, which matches our property tax levy in CPI increase. And then lastly, the golf club rates, those are outlined on pages 71 and 72 of the fee schedule. The weekday and weekend green fees in various categories are going up $1 to $2. Along with that, you'll see some price increases in the driving range fees and also the membership cards. We are also reviewing the business licenses. That is something we hope to do the next year. We are also reviewing the management fees. We are looking at a different model to hopefully better match charging those management fees for the services that we do for the golf and water fund, and that is still under review.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Okay, so moving on, just to give a summary of the budget as a whole before we start getting into the individual departments. On pages 73 to 80 of the budget document are the operating statements. These provide totals of budgeted expenditures and revenue by fund. And as a whole, our total operating budget is 28.9 million in revenue and 36.5 million in expenditures. Including our pension funds, that number would jump up to 32.6 million in revenue and 40.2 in expenditures. One thing to note on the difference between those two figures is that the pension funds are statutorily controlled, so we have very little control over the expenses that are in those funds. So we typically refer to the budget using just those operating funds that we have control over. Looking at those aggregated numbers, it does look a little scary that the expenditures are so much higher than the revenues. But I do want to remind you and those listening at home that the big difference between the two of those is the planned use of fund reserves in each of our funds. And all of those uses are reserved for one-time capital expenditures. We have a significant amount of capital reserves. Particularly in the general fund, we have 1.5 million that's earmarked. And also in the capital fund reserve, we have 4.2 million that we'll be drawing down on that fund. That does sound like a lot of money, but all of those resources have been planned for using our financial forecast, our strategic plan, and our 10-year CIP. These are resources that we've aggregated over time and have been very thoughtful about how these would be spent and anticipating that these would be coming down the line. Let's see. And also important to note, supplementing these one-time uses for capital, Manager Corrali mentioned earlier, we do have significant funding coming in from the Rescue Plan Act, And also in grant funding, those resources aggregated are over $2 million on top of those reserves that we are planning to use as well. So once again, all of these resources are already available. We were planning for this drawdown. In addition, as we mentioned earlier, we'll be going through the CIP. Over the 10-year life of the plan, we are projecting approximately $54 million in expenditures in the various categories, with $9.2 million proposed in the current calendar year. Drilling down a little bit into the main operating statement, this breaks the budget down by fund, so you can see where these figures are coming from. As you look in the surplus or deficit column, these are the funds that we would be indicating that we would be drawing upon for those capital expenditures. And again, this would be one-time drawdowns. Moving from left to right, this would show our projected fund balance as of the end of this year. This includes our fully audited fund balance figures from our last comprehensive annual financial report, and then each of our departments have done the work to go through and project what they anticipate spending in the current year. So using those anticipated year-end estimates, we come up with a projected fund balance where we would start the year and then where we would end the year in 2022. And then each of the aggregated totals of what we are anticipating in revenue and what we are requesting in expenditures would show up in this column here. And then you can see that as an aggregated total, that net amount of what we are anticipating bringing in revenue and what we are requesting in expenditures would be a drawdown of $7.5 million. I do again want to remind you that over $4 million of that are general obligation bonds proceeds that we were planning to spend this year.
Nikki,
then-
does that include all the government funding that we'd also taken in as well? So if there's 4 million in bonds, and then there's that other million something, right? That's
Correct.
part of this. Great.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's part of it. Yes, that's a great point. Thank you. And then also looking at our two largest operating funds, if everything were to go as planned with the budget, which we know doesn't typically happen, but we're planning for it, we would end the year with a 40% fund balance in the general fund, which is just shy of 5 months, 30% fund balance in the water fund, which is just shy of 4 months. Now, these are healthy numbers. This is great for the time being, but we are, if you go back to the financial forecast, we are continuing to plan to draw those fund balances down a little bit over the next 5 years to help support that capital plan. Okay. Moving on, this slide shows the breakdown of revenue by fund. You can see that the largest proportion obviously being in the general fund, that's where the largest amount of activity would be, and the largest amount of property taxes are directed to the general fund. Then in order, you have the water fund, obviously with the main source of revenue being user charges, and then the debt service fund, which is primarily funded by property taxes. And then in terms of budgeted expenditures, again, the largest proportion being the general fund, where all of our operating expenditures lie, with then in order going down to the water fund, again, our second largest operating fund, and then the capital projects fund. This is new this year, being such a large percentage of the budget due to all of the planned capital expenditures for the year. Okay. Moving into the more detailed part of the budget now, starting on page 86 are the department budgets, and we'll be moving through those this evening. But before we get into that, I did want to mention again, we will be incorporating the CIP requests into each of the department budgets this year, rather than looking through the operating budget and then revisiting the capital plan later. But I think it's important to point out the aggregated total of all of the capital requests, so you can see them as a whole as well, as we are going to be discussing them individually. We did try to annotate those projects that are specifically funded by grants or by donations. As Manager Corrali mentioned earlier, we do have 2 squads that are partially funded by a one-time donation, and the Safe Routes to School improvement is largely funded by state grants. The total in the general fund is just about $1.5 million aggregated together. That includes all of the infrastructure, vehicle replacement, and equipment purchases. In the water fund, we are continuing the lagoon transmission main, which I just realized is spelled wrong. Apologize for that. That is largely going to be funded by grants as well. And then we are also continuing our normal water main replacement cycle as well. From the capital fund, obviously the large proportion of these are funded by GO bonds, and the capital fund total is just shy of $4.3 million. Moving on to the motor fuel tax fund, we'll get into this in more detail in a moment, but the large proportionate share of the capital projects here, the 700,000, 600 is going towards the street improvements program. Director Mal will be going through that in more detail later. And then also finally in the golf club fund, we have about $535,000 that's being reinvested into the course this year. Okay. So continuing with the exciting topics, we'll start with the finance department budget. Moving on to page 87. The finance department budget is included in pages 87 to 95. The total budget here is just shy of $1.6 million. Outside of public service personnel, our largest concentration of expenditures are in contractual services. That includes expenditures related to the village's annual audit, actuarial services for the pension fund, investment advisors, financial advisors, and also the lion's share of public liability insurance. This is for workers' comp, property, and casualty. This includes the premium for the entire village as well as any of the deductibles that we pay. We will need to complete, as far as contractual services, RFPs in 2022 for our auditing services as well as our banking services. Both of those contracts will be up. So that will be part of our goals and our work plan for 2022. There are no proposed changes in personnel for 2022 and no proposed changes to our liability insurance policy or deductible. And from a strategic plan initiative standpoint, we will be continuing the training and professional development of our existing staff, and particularly investing in our new staff that came on board this year. And then, as Manager Corrali mentioned earlier, we will be continuing the ERP implementation, which hopefully will be the final phase with payroll and helping support the Public Works Department in their building permit module. And then lastly, just one item to note that we do have a placeholder in the Finance Department budget to transfer into the capital fund. It's a placeholder of $100,000. We had talked about this a few years ago, that if we were to see a large building project or remodel and receive building permits in excess of budget, that we would transfer that money into a capital fund and start using that towards a little bit of a nest egg. So we do have a placeholder for that. It doesn't mean that that transfer will necessarily happen, but we will have to monitor building permit revenues to determine that at the end of the year. And I'll pause here if there are any questions on the finance department. Okay, moving on, I will transfer it over to Chief Lewandowski to talk about the public safety department.
Okay, good evening. The public safety budget starts on page 96 in your packet. I'll go through some highlights real quick. The biggest highlight is our budget for 2022 was up about 6%, and most of that is driven by personnel costs, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Under contractual services, we have 4 service agreements that we've been using for many years. They're still very beneficial to the village and cost effective, and we're going to continue those into 2022. Under personnel, a lot of our budget impact is related to personnel. This year, we're looking for a new management analyst position to assist us with our administrative workload. Things like special projects, data collection and analysis, and then operation program evaluation and research. Presently, those tasks are being done by administrative staff, whether it's lieutenants or the deputy chief or myself. And with our personnel challenges going into next year, we're going to need to concentrate a lot of our time on personnel development, recruiting and retaining employees. So if we can get some administrative help, that would be very beneficial for us. The biggest piece that impacts us regarding personnel is our vacancies. Right now, we are down 5 sworn officers. We've hired 3 since August. One's in the police academy, one's in the fire academy, and one will start in about 3 weeks, who's a police officer already at another police department. So that'll help us stay ahead of the training curve once we get him on board. I will say that staffing shortages in police and fire departments is not unique to Glencoe. In fact, it's a regional and national thing that we're being faced with right now. Our experience, as well as what we're seeing nationally, is there's not very many people interested in becoming police officers or firefighters right now. On the fire side, it's more on the paramedic perspective, but on the police side, it's just not a very attractive job right now. We are continuing to work with the Public Safety Commission. We have an active eligibility list to hire people off of. We're also looking at starting a lateral entry process here in Glencoe. We're working with the Public Safety Commission attorney right now to allow that according to our statutes. This would allow us to recruit existing people with experience, whether it's police officer, firefighter, or paramedic, to help us get our overall numbers back up to our fully sworn staffing levels. And that also helps us with the training initiatives and things like that to get them on board. So we're going to continue to do that. On the paramedic side, particularly, we're being hit hard. And like I said, the staffing shortages are hitting police departments and fire departments throughout the country. And since we do both, it is definitely impacting us because we're getting hit on both sides with one employee pool. Paramedic officers in particular, our numbers have gone down drastically. And the reason is almost all of the people who have left the department within the last year have left to go become firefighter, paramedic for full-time fire departments. So that has significantly impacted our paramedic numbers. We're working through that now. We've changed some of our schedule rules, and our backfill rules are allowing supervisory officers who are certified paramedics to help us fill some staffing shortages. We're actively recruiting for part-time firefighter paramedics as part of our POC program. And we're also going to look at potentially having some contract services if we can't get enough part-time help to help us supplement our staffing temporarily until we get our overall numbers back up to speed and as we get some paramedic training in the near future. So again, the personnel is the biggest hit to our budget. It always is. We're just a personnel-driven department. And as everything else is driven by overtime increases because we have to fill vacant positions. Moving on to CIP, this year we're looking to replace two patrol vehicles. They've reached their useful life. They've had some, they reach all the metrics as far as service records and things like that. I will note that this year, this will be the second year that Ford is offering a hybrid option for their police interceptor SUVs. And we will likely replace the 2 cars that are gasoline vehicles right now with hybrid options for this year. In addition, as Nikki Larson mentioned earlier, we also have a one-time donation that we're going to use to offset those costs. We're also going to, we've also put in to try to get our kitchen remodeled. If you recall, this is the 3rd time we tried to do this. We've struggled trying to find vendors to do this in the past, and we're hoping that maybe we can attack this with some assistance from Public Works and try to be our own contractor and sub some of this stuff out to get our kitchen remodeled. It's well over 25 years old and is due for remodel. We're also looking to replace one of our cardiac monitors this year. We have 3 cardiac monitors total. They're required pieces of equipment for EMS. We have 1 in each ambulance and 1 in our squad. Rather than buy 3 of them at one time, we're looking to phase them in. We'll buy 1 per year for the next 3 years to try to spread out the cost a little bit. And strategic plan initiatives, again, it's going to be based on training and professional development for our staff. As we onboard people, We've got to get them trained at basic entry level things. COVID kind of put a slowdown on our training over the last month or so. So we're going to have to do some catching up on our existing officers for their certifications. So we'll be very busy with training and professional development across the board. And last on the list is grants. Again, I mentioned the donation of some monies for our vehicle replacements. We also have a FEMA Assistant to Firefighter grant pending for our air packs for our fire service. Those are end of life cycle by the end of 2022. So we're going to need to replace those. We also have budgeted monies in our foreign fire insurance fund to cover those costs if by chance our grant is not approved. So in the next few months, we'll have a better idea of whether or not our grant is approved, but either way, by the end of 2020, we will get our air packs replaced as required. And that's a brief synopsis. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So just a quick question on personnel and shortages. Do you get a sense that it's just sort of the nature of the job now, or is the money not enough? I mean, is there some element of pay hasn't gone up fast enough, or is it still just the environment and people not wanting to do the job as much?
It seems to be more just the general environment, is law enforcement in particular. As I said, though, paramedic numbers are down across the country due to some training mandates. It's very difficult to maintain your certifications as their paramedic right now. So again, it's not just local, it is affecting our industry throughout the country.
Okay, thanks.
How many do other villages have a management analyst? And my guess is that you have a heavier, similar to like the health industry, where your doctor spends his whole time entering stuff on the computer and not talking to you. Is it
Right.
similar in terms of the data challenges that you have?
It is.
That would for records and whatnot.
Yes, many other villages that have individual police and fire departments have much more administrative staff to help with those tasks. Since we're combined, we are shouldering that load, and we always have, which is one of our efficiencies. However, when we have to focus on getting our personnel numbers back up and getting people trained up, we just don't have time for something more administrative tasks, and we're just looking for some assistance.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Chief, it's Pete Mulvaney.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm not sure if you're or now is the right time to bring this up, but the donation for the squad cars makes me a little bit uneasy. I don't know if it makes others uneasy, but in particular, this department to receive personal funds. I wonder if there's anybody else has a concern about that. And, you know, it's often framed here as a one-time donation. How do we know it's a one-time donation? Is the person allowed to not allowed to give another? I don't know, it makes me a little queasy. Wouldn't mind if the donations went to a general fund of some sort, but specifically your department makes me worry. Anybody else?
I guess why would it make us queasy?
Oh, just because if it's a donation in this department, there may be different expectations. Because it's I don't know, to me, that's bad optics.
I mean, if it's someone that gives us a donation and then they let him go on a DUI charge 6 months later, we might have a problem, but I'm guessing it's not going to happen.
It's a guess, but sure.
Well, I can add a bit of information, Trustee Mulvaney, just as for the benefit of the group. This was a donation that was received in this calendar year, and it was noted that it should be used in the chief's discretion from the standpoint of necessary equipment for the public safety department. It is unusual, but not certainly unheard of for such donations to be made to police or fire departments in other communities. And based on the information that was received at that time, the intent was simply that they wanted to be able to supplement any costs that the village might undertake to fund the public safety department, not with any expectation of anything else from that standpoint. And
Yeah, let me
so-
just interrupt. I totally get it. I'm sure all the intentions were great this time. And it makes, however, I just wonder, maybe it's a question for legal later. Are there some kind of limits we want to put on that, or any kind of controls on expectations, et cetera? It just doesn't feel right to me. And is it needed or necessary? Can we really truly not afford to replace these cars without the donations? Because I feel like it's taking a ethical risk for, nice, I'm thankful for anybody willing to give, but this feels inappropriate to me.
well, I think
But
perhaps,
maybe not this individual case, right? But the general concept of donations, just carry it out a few steps. Next year, we have 10 people donating, and who knows what does it become you need to donate in order to get certain services? I mean, just play it out a little bit in your mind.
Trustee Mulvaney, I guess maybe my recommendation would be that the staff can come back to the board and integrate into our financial policies a structured policy that would guide any future donations that the village may be the recipient of. We certainly can do that, and I think that would perhaps allay some of those concerns that you've outlined.
Thank you.
I respect the point, but I just want to say we got an anonymous donation. I am extremely grateful to the donors, and I don't really see any problem with it. If the donation had come with strings that were unacceptable, that of course would be an issue. I just read about a large university that is going to build a dorm. It got a huge donation. It's going to build a dorm without windows. I would get why somebody wouldn't want to accept that or other strings, but this has no strings. And I just don't see the problem. I am grateful, and we need the money. And if they want to do it again next year, I'd still be grateful. And if they wanted to give it to the water department or the public works department or the village manager's office, that'd be okay with me too.
To Pete's point, I think there's a difference between those departments and the public safety department. How anonymous is, I mean, is it anonymous internally? So
No.
truly,
No, we know who it is.
right. And so, that's where it can be.
I understand. Trustee Bree, I think, as I mentioned, it is likely best, and I will say this is not something that we have dealt with in the past. We did share the information with the board when it was received back in May, I believe. My suggestion, and I'm happy to draft it even before the board approves the budget in December, is to integrate a donation policy within our financial policies that would outline any conditions that the village might want to place on that donation in kind.
I think having a policy would certainly be appropriate. And yeah, I understand Pete's point. I'm not sure I would want to not take a donation, but it's a very valid point.
Yeah, I agree. I get Pete's point. If we wanted to think about some kind of parameters or policy that we officially put in, I think that makes sense.
Thanks, Chief.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Chief Lewandowski? Okay. Thank you, Chief. Okay, moving on to the Public Works Department, Director Mel.
Good evening. The Public Works, the general fund portion of the Public Works Department budget is found starting on page 111 in your budget document. The calendar year 2022 budget in the general fund for Public Works is just totals just a shade under $7 million. Highlighted for you tonight are a couple items under contractual services. The budget includes funding to continue our third-party vendor relationship for plan review and inspection services with HR Green. We just completed 4 years with HR Green. They moved onto the scene following the retirement of a longtime employee in this building division that covered both inspection and plan review responsibilities in addition to administrative responsibilities. This has created much greater efficiencies and it's a scalable model. Staff continues to find it to be an extremely successful partnership. The board can expect to see a new multi-year agreement with HR Green on the December village board agenda. No personnel changes proposed in this budget. Under the CIP, 2 areas, we've got 6 different vehicles and pieces of equipment to be replaced, including a couple of trucks, our aerial lift truck, the third of the skid steer tractors for our sidewalk snow removal effort. If you recall, the board approved the purchase of 2. The first 2 this year, we did receive those, as was noted earlier, a month early in October. So we're out getting geared up for snow at any moment. So that's good. So the third and final portion of that fleet is included in the budget, as well as a leaf vacuum unit as we are planning to continue that service going forward. There's 3 capital projects in the Public Works General Fund. Probably the significant is the 5th and final year of our downtown sidewalk paver replacement program. This has been, if you've observed it over time, this has been a very scaled and practical application of a restoration effort, capitalizing on the value of the product and removing and resetting sidewalk pavers and from the initial install back in the early 2000s, and we continue to be pleased with that material selection for the downtown sidewalks. The other 2 capital projects in the general fund, as noted earlier, the Safe Routes to School project is finally on track to be on a state letting in the spring. This work is primarily crossing improvements. Will include the first 2 installations of a rectangular rapid reflecting beacon signage at a couple of key pedestrian crossings, which we're going to use as a pilot for that installation. And then third and finally, the Beach Road storm outfall. This is the village's storm sewer that currently discharges kind of in the middle of the Park District Boater Beach, and the plans are to relocate this where it is less visible and impactful on the boating beach operation, and kind of working in partnership with the Park District. Under our strategic plan initiatives in the budget, in addition to training and professional development and the infrastructure that we'll get into in a little more detail in a moment, two projects, initiatives to bring to the board's attention. The first is the planned update to the 1996 comprehensive plan. It's kind of an overdue effort, but this will be the first. We're looking to spread this over 2 years, but that will initiate in calendar year 2022, as well as noted earlier, kind of the final phase of the ERP project is the Tyler Intergov software implementation, which addresses permitting, inspection, and licensing services, and that work has begun in late this year, and that will carry into calendar year 22. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Mr. Chairman. Hello, this is Dudley. I got a quick question. The HR Green contract, Was there enough money in there for the required code updates? I understand that the energy code is going to be, there's a new one that's out. And then there's also a proposal coming forward from the Historic Preservation Commission for a special code for historic buildings. Is there money included in that to support those efforts?
Well, I can take a first crack at that, and the manager Crowley can jump in. I think that effort, I mean, the village has historically adopted updates to the ICC family of codes on a cyclical basis. We're not due probably until 2023 on that, but that would be the heavy lifting on that would be primarily in-house. Trustee Underdock. So I don't anticipate, while we might need some assistance from HR Green, that would not be a heavy lift for them. That would be more in-house staff.
Yeah, I would just add to Director Mao's comments that I think we would benefit from HR Green's expertise and certainly have them as a resource as we would work through that. But I think as we go through the next several years with comprehensive plan, with our review of all of our codes, including the zoning code, I think this is something that we would integrate as part of an overall work plan to update all of our codes across the entirety of the kind of the community development operation.
Great, thank you. I had one further question. In reviewing the budget, I saw that there was a personnel item, intern. Is that a permanent position or just over the summer?
We have a summer engineering intern in the department, but not a permanent position.
It would be a seasonal intern position.
Okay, so the personnel would be, it's not no changes, it's addition of a summer intern.
No full-time.
Yeah, no full-time changes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Director Mao? Okay, thank you, Director Mao.
Thank you.
Moving on to Village Manager's office, and I'll turn this over to Assistant to Village Manager Lester.
Thank you very much, Director Larson. Good evening, trustees and President Rowan. For folks that are following along at home, the manager's office budget will start on page 129. So the manager's office budget for 2022 expenditures total approximately $2.5 million. I will note that this is an increase of approximately 9.5% from calendar year 2021, which I will say is largely attributable to an increase of a full-time staff member, which we'll detail more in a second, as well as an increase to the village's proposed 2022 community grant allocations amount. So going in order on what we have in the slide here, a large portion of our expenditures are for contractual services. The village's legal counsel comes out of the manager's office budget, our corporation counsel, which is Elrod Friedman, and then labor counsel, which is for other non-retainer items. As I hinted at, we have an proposed increase for our full-time number of staff, and I believe Assistant Village Manager Sharon Tanner is going to provide a little bit more information about this position, which is a reinstated communications manager.
Yes, thank you. And as Manager Crowley noted in his comments at the beginning of the presentation, the communications manager position is a reinstatement of a previously vacant position with a bit of restructuring to it. The intent of the position is to aggregate and manage the village's public communications. Right now, it's primarily centralized. That function is primarily centralized in the village manager's office, though it is provided by a number of different individuals, as well as some contractual support. And so this position would aggregate and centralize the communications function to keep pace with our growing public communications on social media, online, and print publications as well. We also intend for this position to have a significant involvement in special event management. So this position will be working closely with all of our departments for both developing and disseminating communications and on the special event side of things. Thank you for allowing me to share that.
Thanks, Sharon. So moving along down the page, next is our planned capital projects for next year. We have 3 of them. First is our council chambers upgrade. As we've talked about previously, the room is in need of some love, especially after the pandemic. This was deferred from actually our stub year 2020. That was actually planned a couple years ago. The next is our information technology infrastructure routing equipment. And then as several staff members have previously explained, we also have some funds allocated to ERP implementation in this hopefully final year. Next, we have some funding allocated for strategic plan initiatives. As part of our ongoing commitment to staff development, we have funding allocated for training and professional development, again, ERP implementation, and then last but not least, and for the strategic plan, additional legal counsel for special projects, an example of which is we've had as part of the plan a comprehensive review of our village code to clean up and modernize, if you will, and fix any errors in our village codes. That's something we're certainly looking forward to next year. And as I alluded to earlier, another large portion of our budget is community grant allocations. As the trustees, you may recall, the village's community grants committee meets every year to receive presentations from local organizations and then make a recommendation as part of the budget development process. On Thursday night, as part of the village board meeting agenda, we'll have some additional information about the committee's recommendation, which is a maximum of $130,000 for next year. And then following Thursday's discussion, staff will input the full board's recommendation into the 2022 budget document. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, this is Pete. I do have a quick question, and it's sort of general question about buildings and offices. You know, given a work from home trend, something that seemed to be somewhat successful for you guys at different levels. Any modeling or investment thought going into creating environments for working from home, and what that implies to the office space owned by the village?
I'll take that one. It's a great question, Trustee Mulvaney, and I'll say we have not gotten to that point. I have had several conversations with our department heads relative to our space usage. I will say many of our office areas are being utilized differently than they were laid out and designed for about a decade and a half ago. And in particular, I reference, the use of physical file cabinets and space like that I think we would need to embark on a more formalized study for our office space and how it may change in an environment where we have certain staff members working part of the time remotely and part of the time here in the office. And so I do think that's something we need to look at. We have not looked at it yet, but it's on a list of things that we want to try to get to, probably not in calendar 22, but in calendar 23.
One quick follow-up question, maybe it's minor. I know that when we accepted a new legal counsel firm, we had some agreements on the fixed rates, which I think were for a year. Any reason to think that we should adjust that bar? It looks like it's the same budget, but we might, maybe I'm wrong, but anyhow, it looks like it's the same budget, and but we know that we'll see an increase in base rates.
I will say we did receive notice from the village's corporation council that their rate would increase on January 1 for the first time since they've been in their new format going back to February of 2020. So this would be their first rate increase. I think the overall line item has not changed because it also includes our labor council as well as any other additional legal services. So sometimes those lines adjust because we dip what we think we're going to need for Labor Council or for any of our other special councils. So I think that's primarily the reason. I don't recall, Sharon, Jordan, you guys may, what that rate shift was for Elrod Friedman.
3%, wasn't it?
I think it was. But we can get that to you. I just don't have it readily at hand.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not questioning the rate, whether it's 3 or 5 or whatever it is. Just making sure that's factored into the budget, that's all.
Thank you, Trustee Mulvaney. Does anyone else have any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Assistant to Village Manager Lester and Assistant Manager Tanner. Okay, moving on to the golf club, and I will hand this over to Manager Nanos.
Thank you, Nikki. Reviewing the golf club budget for calendar year 2022. This is just a brief overview. I have already had 2 full meetings with the Golf Advisory Committee where we reviewed the budget and the capital improvement plan in detail. Contractual services, we are going into the 2nd year of a 2-year agreement with a la carte catering for our food and beverage service. I will say that this year they did reach and exceed the break point of $195,000. So we will be receiving another $2,000 from them this year for exceeding that break point. Next year, their lease goes up an additional $2,000, so they'll be paying us $22,000 flat fee next year, and it's the same break point of $195,000. Personnel, we do have a promotion in our succession planning in Mario Moreno, who is moving up to the assistant superintendent. Mario is on a fast track and is learning very quickly from Dave Arden, our excellent superintendent. Mario is taking on some education and working this winter to pass some certifications. And we do plan on moving Mario into Dave's role when Dave retires, which he's indicated may happen in the next 4 to 5 years. Capital plans, some of the big things to note is our continuous cart path project. We're going into the 3rd year of this project. We've been tackling about 4 holes every year. So this will bring us up to almost a complete continuous cart path throughout the course, which will allow us to have carts and generate more revenue after rain events. The driving range T expansion, we've reviewed at a previous meeting. That is still pending, and we will be reviewing that further to allow for full use of the driving range and incremental revenue that goes along with it. The clubhouse replacement, I'm going to turn this over to Village Manager Corrali to review briefly what our plans are for reviewing this with the board and the public.
Yeah, I wanted to, and thanks, Stella. I think we wanted to just, again, kind of introduce the subject, not to get to a final determination, but to, again, make sure we're bringing the board along on this subject. We included a write-up in the CIP on page 245 that outlines the project. And obviously, this is something that has existed in the CIP for a very long time. There are no resources that are allocated in the CIP at this time. But as we have been talking over the last several months, the fundraising effort to generate private funds to offset the overall costs of this project got underway in earnest during 2021. And the work that group is doing to offset the overall cost of this project is so far going well. And there are going to have to be some decisions made by the village board, again, not tonight, but during the course of the calendar year 2022 budget, as to whether and what sort of public financing options we may want to consider as a component of this project. The golf fund has, for the most part, been self-sustaining over the last 15 or so years. We did consider, and the board did ultimately approve a financial policy update that provides for forgiveness of resources owed back to the general fund over a period dating back about 20 years. And this is the first year for that forgiveness plan, which is to take place over 10 years. And that all being said, there is certainly a desire and a need for this project to take place in order to continue to provide a more diversified revenue stream to support the operations of the golf club, which does not get any supplemental support from our tax levy or any of our other taxing sources. So obviously, if we march down a path of the public financing option to supplement the overall cost of this project, that situation would change. Again, nothing that we want you all to decide tonight, but it's an opportunity as we talk about the budget to again reintroduce the subject, answer questions at this point, gather any feedback that you may have or additional information that you'd like us to create and present back to you at a subsequent date in the future.
Thank you. Strategic plan initiatives, training and professional development, fundraising for the clubhouse, as Manager Corrali stated, is ongoing. And with our new campaign director in place, we have some initiatives coming up within the next month that hopefully will push us to reaching our matching grant of $125,000, which will put us in good shape going into 2022. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the water fund, Director Mao.
Yes, continuing, the water fund is found beginning on page 157 in your budget document. The proposed calendar year 2022 budget for the water fund includes a little under $5 million in expenditures. This is nearly a 30% increase from calendar year 2021, and that's largely attributable. We had a very minimal capital expenditure budget in this current year budget, and we've got a significant number of projects and equipment planned in this proposed budget. Running down our bullet points here, personnel, the budget does include an additional authorized water plant operator position, similar to what we had done in 2021. Reason being, this is an overhire for succession planning. We've had a period of time in our water plant history where we had 2 senior staff retire this year, and in anticipation of potentially a 3rd operator retiring during calendar year 2022, we believe we need the flexibility to find and hire a qualified operator, and then the training, the time to train up and get familiar with the plant operations can be significant. And if we were able to do that and align that with a planned retirement, then we can significantly reduce our overtime coverage needs and ability to manage our operation, which, as you know, is a 24/7 operation. CIP, the budget includes 2 projects that are related more to the plant. One is a deferral of a project from 2021, and that's the replacement of 2 low lift and 2 high lift pumps in the water plant. As we've talked before, while we plan for what the future may hold relative to the plant in its entirety, we continue to seek to upgrade and maintain the system within the current plant, and so that we can continue to produce the high quality water that we're required by regulators and the expectation of the community. Outside of in addition to that, we've got money included in this budget for a share of the concrete crib wall, which is on the lower access driveway down to the plant. This is a project that we're proposing to partner with the Park District on, and we'll be actively pursuing federal funding, grant funding as well to supplement. This is a critical access point to the plant. It obviously has access benefits to the lower beach area, but first and foremost, from our perspective, it's our lifeline to get personnel and commodities down to the plant. In addition, there are water main improvements included. Two of notable. One is continuation of our ongoing water main replacement per our water study, our 2016 distribution study, and that would include 3 different water main segments in 2022. And then in addition, as noted earlier, the ARPA funding is included to be able to complete a third and final phase of our lagoon transmission main, which upon completion would give us new 16-inch HDPE pipe from the end of our distribution system in town out to our crossing on the east side of the Edens, which we believe greatly improves our reliability of that and our ability to keep our elevated tank in service continually. And it also will help let us defer our long-range plans on a replacement of an elevated tank that will be part of an upcoming presentation on our joint feasibility study with the Village of Winnetka in the new year as well. And then lastly, we do have a vehicle replacement scheduled in our water distribution division. It's a smaller Ford Transit vehicle that serves our Julia locating service as well as our operations within the distribution division, and we are planning and seeking out potential alternative electric vehicles for that vehicle replacement as well. Strategic plan initiatives, as noted in prior department budgets, training and professional development dollars are included in this budget, as well as our ongoing infrastructure investment. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question. Is there money set aside to continue the study with Winnetka on the joint water study, or is that funded from a different area?
That is actually funded from the stub year 2020 budget, and we've been slowed in the deliverables on that, Trustee Androdonk, but expect that bring that before the board early in 2022.
Okay. Great, thank you. And one more thing, I think cooperating with the Park District is terrific and encourage us to look at other opportunities. Thank you.
You bet.
Hi, David, it's Pete. Question about your retaining wall. Do you envision, as conceived, do you think it will change any of the slopes or widths of the road? Will the alignment stay the same?
Good question. The installation will be behind the existing crib wall so that we can maintain it through construction. The plan, the long-term plan, this is based on a slope stability study that the village partnered with the Park District on, and some signs of some failure. And this was one of a number of identified locations on the bluff coming down off the end of Park Avenue and the end of Hazel Avenue. We believe in the lower portion, the downhill portion of this ramp is a future capital project to be completed. And in our discussions on that, it would be our intent to try to, in doing that work, try to widen this ramp slightly, because as you know, there's a shared vehicular and pedestrian use, and the feeling both of the village and the Park District staff is that would be if we're going to do that work, which needs to be done, we may be wise to gain a little width in that access ramp.
Sure, makes sense. I would also encourage the wood lagging could be an opportunity for some sort of art program, so long as our sign police and regulations aren't offended by any kind of use of color in that. But those wood laggings can, if it's decent wood, can be incorporated into something a little more artful and playful than just straight lumber. A suggestion for maybe for the park district.
Sure, very good.
Okay, any other questions on the water fund? Okay, continuing with Director Mao into the motor fuel tax fund. This starts on page 169 of the budget.
Right, the motor fuel tax fund proposed budget for this upcoming calendar 2022 budget is a little over $700,000, largely street improvement related, 600,000 of which will supplement the bond funding for maintenance street resurfacing improvements. That's the plan both in 2022 and 2023. I'll talk in a little more detail about the street resurfacing when we get to the capital projects fund. Additionally, there's 100,000 in here for traffic signal controller modifications. This is a carryover, as you might recognize it from a prior budget. With some increases in equipment costs, material costs, and staff time on being able to pursue bid pricing on this, we've elected to defer this, and so this is safety upgrades in the traffic signal controllers at Green Bay and Harbor and Green Bay and Park Avenue.
Director Mao, if I can jump in here. As we had noted earlier, the motor fuel tax fund is also going to be the beneficiary, or has already been the beneficiary, of Rebuild Illinois grant funds. That's approximately $575,000 over 3 years. So 2022 will be the final year of the receipt of these funds, and those funds will be aggregated and also used to supplement the road program. Are there any questions on the motor fuel tax fund? Okay. Moving on to the debt service fund. For those following along in your book, this starts on page 174. The debt service fund is our primary vehicle that's used to track our debt payments. The only source of revenue in this fund is property taxes that come from the debt service levy that's levied as part of the adoption of the bond ordinance when we issue bonds. At the end of 2021, we'll have approximately $21.3 million in general obligation bonds outstanding that impact the property tax levy that would be paid back through the debt service fund. As you may recall, we did issue water obligation bonds in 2020, and those would be paid out of the water fund, so that wouldn't be included in that total. Each year, we do make payments on our outstanding bonds in June and December. Those are purposefully coordinated with the receipt of property tax levy funds in a normal year, understanding that we should have all of the funds allocated to us by that time period. So listed on the screen are the outstanding issues that we have as of today, and that includes the most recent general obligation bond issuance that we issued in 2021 earlier this year. That $7 million was the first tranche of a 2 installment bond issue that was approved as part of the referendum. Are there any questions on the debt service fund? Okay, this one's pretty straightforward. Moving on to the capital projects fund that starts on page 180, and I will turn this back over to Director Mel.
Yes, the capital project fund includes nearly $4.3 million, as noted. These are bond proceeds from the referendum approved village effort in the spring of 2021. The heavy lifting on this first issuance will be in the next 2 years. In starting in calendar 22, will include four bricks and mortar capital improvement projects, storm sewer improvements, and that includes the identified Park Avenue, South Avenue, Washington Avenue storm sewer improvement, which is a second and final phase of a prior stormwater improvement, as well as a more localized stormwater improvement at the intersection of Vernon and Sunset Lane. And then secondly, sanitary sewer improvements. This is a continuation of our ongoing MWRD ICAP efforts to better seal up our sanitary sewer system and identifying, this is a mandated program, identifying deficiencies in our sewer system and then proceeding with proposing and projecting the necessary improvements, whether they're pipe rehabilitation, manhole replacement, and point repairs. Thirdly, sidewalk improvement. There's $150,000 included in this year for sidewalk improvements with a focus on infilling some of the gaps in our sidewalk system identified in the active transportation plan. The largest element of the four is our maintenance street resurfacing program. This will be the first of 2 years, as noted earlier, combined with our MFT and Rebuild Illinois funds, 2 substantial years of maintenance street resurfacing. Efforts are underway as we speak to finalize the list, the condition rating, and the list of streets that'll be included in each year. The plan at this point is to focus in the south half of the village in 2022, and we're in the process. We're narrowing that list of streets that'll meet our budget for 2022, and then we would move north of the center of the village in 2023. And lastly, the Green Bay Trail Hazel crossing improvements. We noted this project was a recipient of funding. The grant funding, the local share portion was folded into the capital projects fund. And this is a comprehensive improvement of the alignment and the crossing with an emphasis on safety improvements of the Green Bay Trail from south of Hazel Avenue all the way up to Park Avenue, linking up with and working in concert with the recently completed Park District trail improvements between Park Avenue and Maple Hill. And with that, I'll hand it off to Director Larson.
Thank you. Not to belabor this point, but just a reminder here on this page that all of these improvements will be funded using bond proceeds. Because these bond proceeds were issued earlier this year, they will close out into fund balance. So in 2022, we'll be technically using fund balance reserves, but it is bond proceeds. Are there any questions on any of the capital projects? Okay. All right, moving on to our police and fire pension funds. These are on pages 184 through 189 of the budget document. As we noted earlier, these two funds are both statutorily controlled. So the benefits that are granted to our public safety officers are set by statute. We are required to comply with that. We do have one remaining beneficiary in our fire pension fund. That budget is about 48 and change, 48,000. That is the value of the beneficiary's benefit, and that will not change for the remainder of her life. So we will continue to fund that on a pay-as-you-go basis for the remainder of that term. The police budget is just shy of $3.7 million. This houses all of our new public safety officers that are coming in and funds the benefits for them. As we mentioned earlier, the contributions are determined by the actuary from the village side, and the statute determines the percentage contribution from our active employees. The good news story here again is that the police pension fund contribution is flat year over year. And then just one thing to note, that we are barreling towards mandatory investment consolidation that is required to occur by June of 2023. On the fire side, they've already started the consolidation efforts. That started October 1st. They are migrating funds in tranches. So each section or each tranche of funds are migrating on a monthly basis. They've opted to do that on the first of the month. The police side is a little bit further behind. We do anticipate that starting in early 2022. So we don't have a specific date yet of when that would happen for our fund. But we will keep you posted, obviously, as soon as we hear more information on that. But we are required to do that prior to 2023. There are no assumptions in the budget for any type of cost savings related to this, because we're not sure of when this might happen. And to the contrary, we do expect to see an increase in investment fees associated with the consolidation at the onset before we start to see a savings. So it could be a few years before we really start to see the benefit of that. And then just one note, if I can go back, one note of clarification on the fire side, because we are funding that pension annuity on a pay-as-you-go basis, we are not required to transfer any assets into the consolidation on the fire side. So that has been cleared with the Consolidated Fire Board. Are there any questions on the pension funds? Okay, seeing none. We're coming full circle here. So heading into page 190 of the budget, the lion's share of the budget document is made up of the Community Investment Program. This is a 10-year plan that goes from 2022 all the way through 2031. As we mentioned earlier, we have about $54 million in infrastructure, capital, equipment, and vehicle replacement needs that we've identified and are projecting out over the next 10 years. There is an associated financing plan with the 10-year CIP, and that includes anticipated revenue bond issues next year in 2023, 2026, and 2029. That would be to fund all of our water main infrastructure improvements over the next 10 years, and those bonds would be repaid through water charges. So we would be revisiting our water rate calculation every year just to make sure that we are generating enough funds to pay off those bonds. And again, those would not hit the property tax levy. So those would be repaid through user charges. Then in addition to that, we also have potential referendum bond issues in calendar years 24, 27, and 2030. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going out to referendum in those 3 years. 2024 would be the second tranche of the general obligation bonds that were authorized earlier this year. And then we would likely go out for referendum again sometime around 2027 for those last two bond issues as well. Understanding that a lot can change, I think we've realized, especially with 2020, a lot can change in a very short time period. So this is our plan as of today, but it certainly has to be revisited every year and to ensure that we are on track to be able to afford that type of financing plan. And then also, as noted earlier, we've included placeholders for the golf clubhouse project, a water treatment plant upgrade, replacement, obviously pending the results of what we see with that Winnetka study, and then also the potential public works garage relocation, which we really just don't have a time frame for, but we know that that has been a point of discussion at some point. And then kind of circling back on the suggested projects, you've heard details now from all of the department heads. If you have specific questions, or if anyone at home has questions about any of these projects, there is a very detailed section of the budget in the capital improvement or the community improvement program section of the budget. And each of these projects are detailed out, including pictures, replacement schedules for any of the vehicles. We have mileage, we have repair costs out there, kind of justifying why these items have been recommended for this year's budget. And at this point, I will pause on this screen if anyone has any questions about any of the capital projects that we've discussed.
Can I ask a question? Your previous slide, you had 3 items at the bottom. Both of those require, or all 3 of those require additional bonds, and what kinds of bonds would be needed?
It's a good question. So for the golf clubhouse project, that's yet to be determined. I think that's going to have to be a discussion of the village board, and will ultimately be supplemented by the fundraising efforts of the Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club. If there were a bond to be considered, it would likely be a general obligation bond. It could also be a limited tax bond, which can be done without a referendum. So those would be the financing options available for discussion for that project. On the water treatment plant side, that would also be a user charge related general obligation bond issue. You could also issue general obligation bonds for that and opt to pay a portion of that by user charge and a portion of that with property taxes. But that would obviously be a large policy discussion of this board to give direction on that. And then the last one, the Public Works Garage relocation, that would also be a general obligation bond issue, should be likely a referendum based.
If I can just add in to Director Larson's very accurate commentary on those 3, I think the reality, particularly with the second 2 of those 3 bullet points, is that there is no definitive schedule tied to those projects. The water treatment plant, obviously, we made some headlines back in 2012 and 2013 when there was a possible partnership opportunity with the Northwest Water Commission. That partnership opportunity, no pun intended, dried up, and the village's the water plant itself remains in excellent working condition. Remains highly functional and still produces some of the best water in the state of Illinois. That being said, it's a facility that in this decade will hit 100 years old, and we know we need to maintain it in the working condition that we've become accustomed to. And that is why the conversation with the village of Winnetka continues to be something that's so important, as they have a water plant that matches ours in terms of vintage. And then the Public Works Garage relocation is really a bit of a Groundhog Day discussion. President Rowan and I have had this conversation that when he was on the village board 30 or so years ago, this conversation took place then. And it remains out there as a possibility should the village board make the determination that the current site of the Public Works Garage on the south end of the downtown would instead be better utilized in a redevelopment opportunity. The village does have space on its storage yard that's located on Frontage Road, where our water tower is currently located, where we could reconstruct a new Public Works Garage if it was the board's determination that that would be the best path forward. So again, we don't allocate resources in these, but we do keep them within the CIP discussion because they have been ongoing. I will say the current iteration of the strategic plan, which, as I noted in the transmittal discussion, is we are essentially asking to proceed through calendar 22 to complete some of the work that we haven't been able to accomplish thanks to the COVID pandemic. It does include some action items related to the Public Works Garage relocation. And I do think it is a worthwhile discussion for us as we go through this year to determine whether any resources in terms of staff time and board time should be dedicated to consideration of how we might or might not move forward with a project in the near future. But I just wanted to give a little bit of additional context on those. Again, there is no imminent need for that replacement, and the water treatment plant is, sometime in the next decade or so. I think the decision, the policy decision, will be one that our community spends a great deal of time focused on.
A couple things. One, was the elevated tank, did we change the timeline for that by a lot?
We did.
Okay.
That was going to be, it was originally slotted in 2023, I think last year, and we've moved that all the way out to 2031 because of that Skokie Lagoon transmission main replacement. Now we have bought ourselves a lot more time. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to happen in 2031, but it's just kind of to keep it out on the horizon for us.
And Trustee Vree, I would note that is another component of this joint study with the Village of Winnetka. And something that I think we would, as we work through that plan, would consider what the ultimate timeline would be.
Okay, and then the other, and I just don't remember, but when we went through the whole water rate study and our water plans, the use of revenue bonds, I know we spent a lot of time when the revenue bonds we recently issued were the first ones we had issued in quite some time, to go from not issuing them to then becoming a policy to issue them every 3 years. I think we just want to be careful how that looks, especially considering those, they're very different than referendum bonds. So just making the point that we went from not issuing them to now they're on the calendar every 3 years. I think that's something to be at least discussed.
Agreed, Trustee Vree. I think if we proceed with this plan, again, this is a fluid financing plan intended primarily to be a guidepost for us as we're considering on an ongoing basis what sort of investments in the community we're going to need to make. This year was an unexpected year, this year and next, relative to the water fund, owing to the availability of American Recovery Plan Act resources. If, because of the federal infrastructure plan that was just passed, there are additional resources made available to us, particularly for water infrastructure, the entirety of the plan as we have it today may change. And I think this is really intended to be more of a front burner conversation as we go through and as we generate resources. So as you'll recall, the rate analysis that was done in 2017 was built off of a capital investment plan for the water distribution infrastructure that anticipated about $20 million worth of investment in our water mains, elevated tank, and other ancillary componentry. The rate structure that we have in place today and has been in place since 2017 essentially is designed to fund that on a basis of cash and debt issuances. And so I think as we see the water revenue streams adapt and change from year to year, we will look at how that water rate is structured and make some determinations about debt issuance in the water fund. But it is right now anticipated, those investments are anticipated to be user fee based investments, whether it be through debt issuance or the use of reserves, or, as we're hopeful, additional injections of resources from the federal government.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions on any of the capital projects? Okay, and I'm going to skip over to next steps here.
Jump back, Nikki. We can talk through community grants real quick.
Would you like to? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Community Grants Committee, which is made up of President Rowan, trustees Rubin and Vree, met back in October. Jordan, I'm not sure if you were prepared to make any comments on this, or if anybody from the committee wanted to make any comments relative to the recommendations that were put forward. But this outlines the recipients that have applied for those resources and at least the recommendations from the committee that have been noted. I will note, as Finance Director Larson commented on before, this $130,000 number has been integrated into the budget that is before you tonight. If you make any changes, we would adjust it, but we, as a placeholder starter point, use that as the figure, and the board can elect to make any changes that it may choose.
Manager Crowley, I can say a few words briefly. I will make note, as Manager Crowley said, the maximum recommendation from the committee was $130,000. You'll see in the top line for the Chamber of Commerce, there's a little number 1 next to it. The committee was in agreement for the other applying organizations with the exception of this one. I will say from our understanding, the Chamber of Commerce, which is the newly merged Winnetka Northfield Glencoe Chamber of Commerce, is seeking funds from our partner municipalities, the villages of Winnetka and Northfield. And the committee directed staff to follow up with additional information about what other grants or funding that those communities may be having. And that's why the recommendation is not final.
I would note, we did seek out that information. The chamber has requested a similar dollar figure from the village of Winnetka, the same dollar figure, or excuse me, the village of Northfield. The village of Winnetka, they've requested $25,000 from them. My understanding is that both of their boards are still considering those allocations. And it is likely that in some form, they anticipate providing those allocations to the Chamber of Commerce. If nobody has any comments or questions, we'll proceed with this number in the budget and move forward with that as we move forward with the budget at the December board meeting.
Thank you, Manager Corrali. So at this point, really what we were trying to achieve this evening was to receive feedback from the board on our fee and fine analysis recommendations, our recommendations from our departments, and also our CIP recommendations. In terms of the next steps of the budget, where we are today, this concludes our presentation of the draft budget. On Thursday evening, we will be having the property tax public hearing. And then in December, we would schedule a formal budget presentation at the village board meeting, and the recommendation of approval of the appropriations ordinance, the calendar year 22 budget, and another 2, and then also the approval of the 21 property tax levy. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions, or if any of the committee members have questions for any of our staff.
Hi, I have a question. Or a thought, which is that, and I think it was Howard that pointed this out to me, that we've just had the president sign the infrastructure bill. I don't know exactly how many billions of dollars that will mean to Illinois, or what the chances are that Glencoe, as has been mentioned on this Zoom already, may be able to make use, be allocated certain dollars. But it seems like between that and just in general, you all have done an amazing job of doing so much with so few personnel. And we're adding a couple of positions, well needed, certainly justified. And I'm wondering, though, if we will be adequately staffed to be able to take advantage of the ability to try to go out and either get federal funds, state funds, private grants of various and sundry sorts, such as the ones that are helping supplement our budget this coming year, and having a dedicated person or persons or either third-party services if possible, if that's the way to go. But I'm concerned that the budget should expressly contemplate spending money to bring in money from those that are not our taxpayers directly, in terms of those other potential sources. And whether that's a person, an engineer, a grant writer, whomever. And I've had some discussions with Phil about that in more detail, but I would encourage the staff to think about that and whether or not we ought to bolster our personnel. Thank you.
I'm not on the committee, but let me say that I agree with the point that Trustee Rubin just made. This could be a once in a generation opportunity to find help for our infrastructure. No guarantees we're going to get the help, but we really should do everything we can to do it. And let me also echo what Gary said about the work on the budget. Though it is just awesome what our staff has done. It clearly is a huge project starting last spring. All the departments were involved to put all this together. And we've all read the budget. It was actually interesting reading. It was persuasive reading. It taught me more about the village than I knew, and I thought I knew a bunch already. So I want to, we don't have a lot of places to look for money in Glencoe. It's the taxpayers. There are a lot of reasons for that, some of which were mistakes the village made in years past. But so I want to congratulate everybody from staff on this call and all the people that you worked with for the unbelievable accomplishment. But let's also, as Gary points out, let's also see if we can hit the jackpot here. This is our only chance, and I think it would be worth it to spend a little bit more in that effort. And if we fail, well, it was worth the shot. But there's a lot of money lying around now, and we might not fail.
Well, I'll speak that if there's a consensus opinion that we should work in to the draft budget, a funding source to accommodate that effort. I do think there may be a few different ways to do so, whether it's a contractual arrangement or whether it's a staff member. I'd like to talk through that with the staff, with the executive team, and come back to you with the final budget in December with an allocation in there, if that is the consensus of the group. Happy to do that. I agree with President Rowan in particular that this is a likely once in a generation infusion of public resources from the federal government that we may likely not see again for a very long time. And regardless of the exact project or the specific effort, we know we have $54+ million worth of capital investments that we need to make as a community, plus a variety of other things that are out there. So there's no shortage of need for those federal dollars. And I'd love to be able to invest those federal dollars in our community. So this would be a significant help, I think, in our efforts to secure those resources.
Let me throw out one other thing. I think we probably are going to need to make the investment that has just been discussed. Another possibility, that the group trying to raise money for the golf course improvements, the golf club and the clubhouse, they are largely volunteers. They've hired a professional, but they're largely volunteers. A number of them are geezers like me. They're older, they may be retired, but they have some skills. And I wonder if in Glencoe, we might be able to also find some help from folks that would know how to do this and might want to volunteer their services. I don't know how to find that, but we should look.
It's a very good idea. We certainly can look into that too. Okay.
This is a quick question. The last slide you showed that showed the grant awardees. Is that in our packet? I don't remember seeing that. Yeah, thank you. Is this in here somewhere?
Trustee oops, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Trustee Mulvaney, it's actually in Thursday's Finance Committee packet. We're a little bit ahead of schedule in terms of where we landed. So it is in there with a cover memo that I believe Jordan created. And I would also note that there is no final determination that anybody's making tonight. If there are additional changes or thoughts that anybody wants to share, and particularly if this is something you want to give a little bit more thought to, there's no reason that you have to kind of coalesce around these numbers right now. No approvals are being made tonight. That's taking place in December.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, are there any other questions about the budget? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for participating in that. Everybody who put it together, especially, but then the board as well. Thank you very much. Are there any other topics that we should discuss tonight?
I mentioned the presentation, the preparation of the budget. I didn't mention the presentations tonight, which were terrific. So I just, this is the first time I've done this as president. I don't remember quite the same thing when I was on the village board 35 years ago. And, you know, I'm honored to be working with you folks. This was great.
Thank you, President Rowan. We appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Did we get any public comments while we were in the meeting?
No, we did not.
Okay, thanks. So if there's nothing else to discuss, we got through the whole budget in 2 hours, not too bad. So thank you. And then can I have a motion to adjourn?
Before we do that, Trustee Bree, real quick, I know we have another Finance Committee meeting scheduled on Thursday night to begin at 5:30. I would like to, if we can, maintain that meeting because I believe we could utilize that time for closed session discussions that we otherwise might have to schedule after the board meeting. It might make for an earlier night for everybody if schedules accommodate that. I need to circle back with some folks who would be joining us in those discussions to make sure that their schedules accommodated. But if this group is okay, I'd like to try to keep that 5:30 start time on Thursday and perhaps get out a little bit earlier following the village board meeting. That's at 7. If that's okay, that's what we'll do.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. I did hear trustee Hallwax move to adjourn.
Second,
All right. Trustee Bree,
Yes.
trustee Hallwax,
Yes.
trustee Rubin.
yes.
All right.
Adjourned.
Meeting
Thank you,
adjourned.
everyone.